to make sure to directly teach how is conflict resolved, appropriate ways of resolving conflict. That's going to mean a lot of mediation with your kids. It's going to mean you sit there with them while they're talking to each other and help them to do things in a healthy way and help them to communicate in a healthy way. And it takes a lot of time. But as we've done this with our kids, we've seen how they learn empathy, they learn conflict resolution skills, and they become a lot more willing to try to compromise. They have the skills they need to get into fewer arguments. And now, as we have teenagers, we're seeing that our teenagers, when they and their sibling are in a conflict, a lot of times they can work it out without us having to be involved. And they both will come out of it happy and still friends with each other. So teaching conflict resolution is a really huge skill that helps your kids to eventually be able to be better friends with each other. So that's the first one. Second really important key point, and I think a lot of families miss this one, is there is no bullying allowed. Now, many of us grew up in families where teasing and poking fun at each other and sarcasm and biting comments, those were the norms, and they were ways that families communicated with each other, and in some ways it's how they communicated affection and love. And the difficulty with that is that there are always going to be hurt feelings with those situations, especially with littler kids. Little kids don't understand conflict. They don't understand irony. And even into their teen years, they're still they're still learning how to understand how humor works. They're learning how sarcasm works, irony. These are all subtle communication styles that even a teenager is still just learning. And so we have made it a rule in our house that you are not allowed to be a bully to your siblings. We don't permit our kids to get away with manipulating each other. We don't permit them to speak to each other in a harsh tone. We don't permit them to speak to each other in biting words. We don't allow insults. We don't allow name calling. Any of these things that can be considered bullying or manipulative behaviors, we put a stop to it, and we don't let our kids continue in them. If we hear it happening, or if it's reported to us that that's what happened, we take it seriously and we communicate about it. And we don't let our kids continue to do this, because these are the kinds of things that tear down relationships. And kids don't know that. They don't have the foresight to recognize that these things are damaging to relationships. They need us as adults and parents to step in and say, hey, that's not going to build the kind of relationship you're going to want with your sibling in 15, 20 years. There are really hard comments that I heard from siblings growing up that cut me deep and that I still remember to this day. And there's a really important saying that goes along with this. Sometimes you're tempted to think that these harsh comments, they're not important, or that speaking to someone in anger is something that's easily forgotten. But the truth of the matter is that the tree remembers and the axe doesn't. The person who's saying the really harsh or mean or unkind things, they forget about it even seconds later. The person who hears it can go in and it can be deep. So we put a stop to any kind of bullying behavior or unkind talk with our kids. It goes along with the third point, which is expecting kindness towards each other. We expect and we teach our kids how to be kind to each other, how to think of another person before themselves, and some of this is manners, some of it is, saying please and thank you, or speaking in a kind request voice, or offering someone the last piece of food, or checking to see if anybody else wants the last cookie on the plate before we help ourselves to it. Some of these are just things that we teach our kids as a way of thinking of someone else first. And it's not that they can never, it's hard because both my husband and I grew up with somewhat codependent tendencies due to the abusive family situations we were in. And so, but for me especially, I was taught that to be kind meant I always had to be last, and I was taught to be a doormat essentially. And so I have to be careful not to overdo it with that. But kids don't, like, they're naturally selfish. They're naturally designed to get their needs met and not necessarily think about anyone else. And so we do have to train them to do that. We have to train them to think kindly, to think about what someone else would be feeling in that situation, to teach them empathy. And so that's something we take time to teach our kids.